The night Margaret Hale's car went over the embankment, she had exactly three thoughts before the world went dark: that her phone was shattered, that no one was coming back for her, and that maybe this was exactly how a woman like her deserved to die. Alone, unforgiven, forgotten before dawn. She was the richest woman in her industry. She'd built an empire on precision, on contracts that didn't bend, on decisions that didn't waver. She had everything except the one thing that mattered when your blood is freezing into the snow and your last breath tastes like metal and regret. Someone who cared if you lived. But in a cabin 3 miles up that mountain lived a man who'd lost everything to people like her. A single father who'd buried his wife because of a mining accident. A man who should have kept driving when he saw the wreckage. Who should have let the mountain take what it wanted. Instead, he carried her home. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you're ready for a tale of second chances, impossible forgiveness, and the kind of truth that breaks you before it saves you, hit that like button and let's begin. Left to die after a crash, the richest woman met the loneliest man. What happened next? Broker Margaret Hale had spent 43 years learning not to need anyone, and it had taken exactly 14 seconds for that lesson to fail her completely. 14 seconds between the moment her driver's eyes met hers in the rearview mirror, wide panic, full of something that looked almost like hatred, and the moment he jerked the wheel hard to the right. 14 seconds to understand that the man she'd trusted to navigate these mountain roads had just made a choice. That the brake lights ahead of them, her head of security's vehicle, weren't slowing down to help. That she was alone in the back seat of a car that was no longer on the road. The impact when they hit the guardrail sounded like the world ending. Metal screaming against metal glass turning to powder. Her body thrown against the seatbelt so hard she felt something crack in her ribs. Then the terrible, weightless moment of free fall. The car tumbled. Once. Twice. She lost count after the third rotation, lost everything except the animal knowledge that she was going to die right here, right now, and there wasn't a single person on this mountain who would stop it from happening. When the car finally settled on its roof on its side, she couldn't tell the silence was worse than the screaming had been. Margaret hung suspended by her seatbelt, blood running down her face in a warm trickle that tasted like copper and failure. Her phone had been in her hand when the driver made his choice. Now it was somewhere in the darkness, shattered, useless. Through the broken windshield, she could see snow falling peaceful and relentless, already starting to bury the wreckage. Already starting to bury her. She tried to move and agony lanced through her left leg. Something was very wrong there. Something sharp and grinding and wrong in a way that made her vision go white at the edges. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely work the seatbelt release. When it finally gave, she fell hard against the crushed roof of the car, and the sound that came out of her throat was animal raw. Nothing like the voice that commanded boardrooms and ended careers with a single word. Cold. God, it was so cold. She'd grown up in cold like this. Different mountains, same poverty. Before she was Margaret Hale CEO, before she was the woman who'd clawed her way to the top of an industry that didn't want her, she'd been Maggie. Just Maggie. The girl whose mother cleaned other people's houses and whose father drank away every paycheck before it could buy heat for their one-room apartment. She could still remember what it felt like to wake up and see her breath in the air inside her own bedroom. Could still remember stealing food from the school cafeteria and hiding it in her backpack because dinner wasn't guaranteed. Could still remember the day she'd looked at her mother's hands, red, cracked, destroyed by chemical cleaners and other people's dirt, and sworn she would never ever live like this again. And she hadn't. She'd put herself through community college, working 3 jobs. She'd talked her way into a secretary position at a mining company, then studied every contract, every negotiation, every deal, until she understood the industry better than men who'd been born into it. She'd married Robert Hale because he had connections she needed, and she'd divorced him when those connections were secured and his expectations became unbearable. She'd built an empire, and now she was going to die in it alone because the people she'd surrounded herself with had finally decided she wasn't worth saving. The thought should have made her angry. Margaret Hale was always angry. It was the engine that drove everything, the fuel that had powered every impossible climb. But lying there in the wreckage, feeling her body temperature drop degree by degree, all she felt was tired. Tired of fighting, tired of winning, tired of being the woman everyone feared and no one loved. Her marriage had lasted 6 years. 6 years of Robert trying to make her smaller, softer, more manageable. 6 years of dinner parties where she had to smile and nod while men dismissed her ideas, then watching them present those same ideas as their own the next day. 6 years of coming home to a man who said he loved her, but really just loved the idea of taming something wild. The divorce had cost her half her savings and all her illusions about partnership. After that, she'd stopped pretending, stopped trying to be the kind of woman people could love. She became the kind of woman people couldn't ignore, couldn't dismiss, couldn't destroy. She became successful, and success she'd learned was the loneliest achievement in the world. The snow was piling up on the broken windshield now, each flake perfect and indifferent. Beautiful, really, like the mountain didn't care that she was dying, like nature had no opinion about Margaret Hale one way or another. She'd fired the driver 2 weeks ago. Peterson, that was his name. She'd fired him for being late, for making excuses, for showing up smelling like whiskey one morning. She'd fired him the way she fired everyone, efficiently, without emotion, with a severance package that was legally required but not generous. Then she'd hired him back when her regular driver got the flu. Stupid. Such a stupid choice. But Margaret hadn't gotten where she was by being sentimental about personnel decisions. Peterson had needed the work. She'd needed a driver who knew these mountain roads. It should have been simple. Except Peterson had a brother who'd worked in the mines. Peterson had a brother who died when one of her newly acquired properties had cut corners on safety to meet her aggressive production targets. Peterson had a brother whose widow was still fighting Margaret's lawyers over compensation. She should have made the connection. She would have made the connection a year ago, 5 years ago, back when she was sharp-focused, back when she still believed that staying 3 steps ahead of everyone meant staying safe. But she'd been tired lately, distracted. The board was pushing her toward retirement, and her lawyer had just presented her with another lawsuit, some small town claiming environmental damage from runoff at one of her sites. Another problem to solve, another fight to win, another reminder that no matter how high she climbed, there was always someone trying to pull her down. So she hadn't checked Peterson's background carefully enough, and now she was paying for it. Her leg had gone numb. That was bad. She knew enough about hypothermia to know that numb was dangerous, that her body was shutting down, prioritizing her core, abandoning her extremities, abandoning hope. How long before someone found her? Hours, days? Would anyone even look? Her assistant would notice when she missed tomorrow's board meeting. But Sandra would assume Margaret had changed her plans, had gone dark the way she sometimes did when she needed to think. The board would be relieved, probably. Give them more time to plan their coup, to figure out how to force her into early retirement so they could install someone younger, more pliable, more willing to prioritize shareholders over principles. Her lawyer would call eventually, but Jim was used to her disappearing, used to her demanding solitude when she was working through a problem. There was no one else, no family, no friends, no one who would panic when she didn't answer her phone, who would demand answers, who would refuse to accept that Margaret Hale could simply vanish. She'd built her life to be self-sufficient, impenetrable, independent. She'd built her life to be alone, and alone was exactly how she was going to die. The cold was inside her now, not just on her skin, but in her bones, in her blood, in the spaces between her thoughts. She could feel herself slowing down like a clock, winding down like something precious and irreplaceable, running out of time. She thought about her mother, dead 12 years now. They hadn't spoken in the 5 years before that. Margaret had sent money, of course, paid for the little house in Florida, made sure the bills were covered. But she hadn't visited, hadn't called, hadn't known how to bridge the gap between who she'd been and who she'd become. Her mother had left her a letter. Margaret had never opened it. It was still in her office safe, still waiting for a version of herself that was brave enough to face whatever disappointment or pride or confusion those pages held. Too late now. Too late for a lot of things. She was drifting. She knew she was drifting. Knew that sleep was dangerous, that closing her eyes might mean never opening them again. But the cold was so heavy and she was so tired. Just for a moment, she thought. Just rest for a moment. Her eyes closed. The snow kept falling, and then light. Faint at first. So faint she thought she was imagining it. But it was growing stronger, cutting through the snow, through the darkness, through the fog, that had settled over her thoughts like a shroud. A voice. Rough, shocked human. Jesus Christ. Hands on the door. Someone was pulling at the door. The metal groaned, resisting, and then suddenly gave way. Cold air rushed in, even colder than the air inside the car, and Margaret tried to open her eyes, but her lashes were frozen shut. Hey, hey, can you hear me? The voice was close now, male, urgent, hands on her shoulder, her neck checking for a pulse. Don't move, just don't move. Okay, I've got you. She wanted to laugh. Got her? Got her how? Got her like Peterson had gotten her, like Robert had gotten her, like every person who'd ever promised help and delivered betrayal. But she couldn't form words, could barely form thoughts. She felt herself being lifted, carefully, slowly, like she was something fragile, like she was something worth saving. The pain in her leg exploded, and she did make a sound, then a gasp, a whimper, something small and broken that she hated herself for. I know. I know it hurts. I'm sorry. Just hold on. He was carrying her through the snow, up the embankment. She could feel his heart beating against her cheek, could feel the strain in his arms, the determination in every step. He was breathing hard, struggling, but he didn't stop, didn't leave her. Margaret Hale had spent 43 years learning not to need anyone. And in that moment, wrapped in the arms of a stranger who had no reason to save her, she understood just how badly that lesson had failed. Thomas Reed had learned to trust his instincts, and his instincts were screaming. He'd been checking the old logging road, something he did every few days in winter, making sure no idiots had tried to use it as a shortcut and gotten themselves stuck. The road had been closed for 5 years, ever since the lumber company pulled out. But that didn't stop tourists from thinking they knew better than the signs. Usually he found nothing. Occasionally he found tire tracks that made him shake his head. Once he'd found a sedan buried in a drift and had to call in the county to extract a family of 4 who'd thought their GPS knew more about mountain roads than the locals did. He hadn't expected to find wreckage. The car had gone over the side maybe 3 hours ago, judging by how much snow had accumulated on it. It was expensive, some kind of luxury sedan black, the kind of vehicle that had no business being on this road in the first place. And it was destroyed, completely, utterly destroyed. No one could have survived that crash, except someone had. He'd seen her through the broken windshield, a woman hanging upside down, not moving. His first thought was that he was too late. His second thought was that he had to check anyway. And then she'd made a sound. Small, weak, but alive. Alive. Thomas had spent the last 6 years defined by death, his wife's death. The slow, terrible death of his hope. The death of any future that looked different than the one he was living alone, struggling, raising his son in the same cabin, where he'd grown up, where his father had died, where everything familiar was also everything that hurt. He understood death, understood how it came, how it took, how it left holes in the world that never really filled back in. But this woman was alive, and that meant he had a choice. He could call it in, use his satellite phone, get emergency services up here. It would take them hours in this weather. The storm was getting worse. The roads were already impassable, but they'd come eventually. He could wait with her, keep her warm, do what he could, or he could bring her home. His cabin was 15 minutes away. He had heat supplies, basic medical knowledge from years of living too far from hospitals to rely on them. He could stabilize her, keep her alive until the storm passed. If he called it in, she might die before help arrived. If he took her home, she might die in his arms. Either way, she was his responsibility now. He chose. She was lighter than he expected, and that scared him. This wasn't a small woman. She was tall, probably 5'9" or 5'10", but she felt almost fragile in his arms. Breakable. Her skin was gray-white, her lips blue, her breathing so shallow he had to watch her chest just to confirm it was happening. Advanced hypothermia, probably broken ribs. Definitely a broken leg. He could see the unnatural angle even through her expensive slacks. Possible internal bleeding, possible head trauma, possible death. Thomas pushed harder through the snow. His truck was parked where the logging road met the trail. He'd walked in because the drifts were too deep for driving, but now he wished he'd risked it. Every second mattered. Every degree of body temperature she lost made survival less likely. He got her to the truck and laid her as gently as he could in the back seat. She made that sound again, that small, broken whimper, and her eyes fluttered but didn't open. "Stay with me," he said, surprising himself with how much he meant it. "Just stay with me." The drive home was the longest 15 minutes of his life. The cabin was dark when he arrived. Ben was at a friend's house, wouldn't be back until tomorrow. Thomas had never been so grateful for his son's social life. He carried the woman inside and laid her on the couch nearest the wood stove. The fire had burned down to coals, but he built it back up quickly, efficiently, the way his father had taught him. Heat first. Always heat first. Then he started the real work. Her clothes were soaked through ice crystals forming in the fabric. He had to get them off, had to get her dry. It felt wrong, invasive, like a violation, but it was also necessary. This was survival, not intimacy. He worked quickly, clinically, replacing her wet things with his own thermal underwear. Thick socks, a flannel shirt that swallowed her frame. Her leg was definitely broken. The bone wasn't through the skin, thank God, but the swelling was already severe. He splinted it with ski poles and athletic tape, trying to ignore the way she gasped when he had to straighten it. Her ribs were bruised, possibly cracked. He wrapped them carefully, not too tight. Restricted breathing was dangerous, but so was the pain that would come with every breath if he left them unsupported. The cut on her forehead wasn't deep, but head wounds bled like murder. He cleaned it, applied pressure, closed it with butterfly bandages from his first aid kit. And through it all, she didn't wake. When he'd done everything he could, Thomas sat back and looked at her. Really looked at her. She was older than he'd first thought. 50 maybe. Older than his wife had been when she died. There were lines around her eyes, silver in her dark hair. Her hands resting on the blankets he'd piled over her were manicured but not soft. These were hands that worked, that did things. Who was she? Why had she been on that road? And why, the thought crept in, unbidden, unwelcome. Why had she been alone? A car like that, clothes like those, the jewelry he'd removed, and set aside a watch that probably cost more than his truck earrings. That caught the firelight like trapped stars. She had money. Serious money. People with that kind of money didn't drive mountain roads in snowstorms alone. Something had gone wrong. Thomas went to the kitchen and heated soup on the camp stove. Chicken and rice. Simple, warm something her system could handle when she woke. If she woke. He made coffee for himself. It was nearly midnight. He should sleep, should rest, should trust that he'd done everything he could. But he couldn't leave her, so he pulled his chair close to the couch and watched her chest rise and fall, watched color slowly, so slowly, return to her skin, watched the tension in her face ease, as the warmth soaked in, as her body decided maybe possibly it was going to survive. Around 3 in the morning she stirred, her eyes open, just slits, confused, unfocused. She looked at him, and in a voice barely above a whisper, rough with cold and pain, and something that sounded almost like wonder, she asked, "Why did you save me?" Thomas didn't have an answer. Didn't have a good one anyway. He should have said because it was the right thing to do. Because he couldn't live with himself if he'd left her there. Because despite everything life had taken from him, he wasn't the kind of man who let people die when he could prevent it. But what came out was simpler, truer. "Because you were there," he said. "Because you needed help. Because I could." She stared at him for a long moment. Then her eyes closed again and she slipped back into sleep. But something in her face had changed. Something that looked almost like relief. Morning came in shades of gray, weak light, filtering through windows that hadn't been properly cleaned in months, maybe years. Thomas woke in the chair beside the couch, his neck stiff, his back screaming protest. He'd meant to stay awake to keep watch, but somewhere around dawn, exhaustion had won. The woman was still breathing, still alive. Small victories. He stood carefully, trying not to wake her, and went to check the weather. The storm had intensified overnight. 3 feet of new snow, maybe more, with drifts twice that height against the north side of the cabin. The road would be impassable for days. Even his truck, built for this kind of terrain, wouldn't make it through. They were stuck. Thomas made more coffee and stood at the window watching the snow fall with the practiced patience of someone who'd weathered 48 winters in these mountains. Being stuck wasn't new. Being stuck with a stranger who might die was. "Where am I?" Her voice was stronger than it had been last night. Still rough, still weak, but human. Conscious. Thomas turned. She was awake, trying to sit up, then stopping with a case when her ribs reminded her that was a bad idea. "Easy," he said, crossing to her. "You've got broken ribs." Maybe a concussion. Definitely a broken leg. You need to stay still. She looked down at herself, at his clothes too big on her frame, at the splint on her leg, at the bandage on her forehead. Then she looked around the cabin, taking it in. The rough-hewn walls, the wood stove, the basic furniture, the complete absence of anything resembling luxury. "This is your home," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yeah, you brought me here. Emergency services couldn't get up the mountain in the storm. You wouldn't have lasted another hour in that car." She was quiet for a moment, processing. Her eyes moved to the window, to the snow, still falling steadily. "How long will the storm last?" 3 days, maybe 4. "I need to make calls. I need to—" She looked around, frantic, suddenly. "My phone, my bag." Phone was destroyed. There was no bag in the car. Thomas paused. "Just you." The way her face changed told him that meant something. Something bad. "Just me," she repeated softly. "I have a satellite phone. Limited minutes, but you can—" "No." The word came out sharp, certain, then softer. "No, not yet." Thomas studied her. She was afraid, trying to hide it, but afraid. Of what? The storm, her injuries, or whoever had left her in that car. "You hungry?" he asked, changing the subject. She blinked, surprised. Yes, actually." He brought her the soup he'd made, helped her sit up enough to eat. She took the bowl with shaking hands and sipped carefully. After a moment, her eyes closed. "It's good," she said, and she sounded like she meant it, like maybe it was the first good thing that had happened to her in a long time. They didn't talk while she ate. Thomas busied himself with the fire, with checking her splint, with all the small tasks that came with keeping a cabin livable in winter. But he was aware of her watching him, studying him the way he'd studied her last night. Finally, she set the empty bowl aside. "I'm Margaret," she said. "Margaret Hale." The name meant nothing to him. Should it have? She said it like she expected recognition, like people usually knew who she was. "Thomas Reed. You live here alone?" "With my son, Ben. He's 12. He's at a friend's house, won't be back until the road's clear." Something flickered across her face. Relief, maybe, or disappointment. He couldn't tell. "Thank you," she said, "for saving me, for bringing me here, for—" She gestured vaguely at herself. "All of this. You already thanked me last night." "Did I?" She looked uncertain. "I don't remember much after the crash." Thomas sat down in the chair, cradling his coffee. "What do you remember?" Her hands tightened on the blanket. "Driving, the storm getting worse, and then—" She stopped, started again. "My driver. He jerked the wheel, deliberately. We went over." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. "He tried to kill you," Thomas said. "Yes." "Why?" Margaret laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Because people hate me. Because I've spent my entire life making choices that benefit me at the expense of others. Because I'm very, very good at what I do, and what I do leaves casualties." The honesty surprised him. Most people would have made excuses, spun stories, played victim. "What do you do?" he asked. "I acquire companies. Mining companies, mostly. I restructure them, make them profitable, make them efficient." She met his eyes. "I fire people, cut benefits, reduce safety margins when the math says I can get away with it. I make shareholders rich. And yourself. And myself." No apology in her voice. Just fact. "I'm very good at it." Thomas thought about the mines, about the company that had bought out the local operations 6 years ago, that had cut corners, that had changed policies until the day his wife Jessica didn't come home. Until the day the foreman had shown up at his door with his hat in his hands and death in his eyes. He pushed the memory down. That was a different conversation. Maybe one they'd never have. "So someone you fired tried to kill you," he said. "Someone whose brother I killed." She said it flatly, indirectly, but still. "You know who?" "I figured it out. Lying in the snow. Had time to think." She looked at her hands. "Had time to realize I deserved it." "No one deserves that. Don't they?" She looked up at him, and there was something raw in her eyes, something that had been buried under years of armor. "I've destroyed lives, Thomas. Families, communities. It's all in the name of profit. All because I was so determined to never be poor again that I stopped seeing the people I stepped on to get here. Thomas didn't know what to say to that, didn't know if there was anything to say. The storm's not letting up, he said finally. You're stuck here for a few days. We should probably work on getting you mobile. You're going to need crutches. I don't want to be any trouble. Too late for that, but he said it without malice, almost with humor. She smiled, just a little, just enough to make her look human instead of haunted. The days developed a rhythm. Thomas woke early, built up the fire-made coffee. Margaret woke slowly, stiffly, grimacing through the pain her body insisted on reminding her of. He helped her to the bathroom, an awkward, humbling process for both of them, and then to the kitchen table where she sat and watched him make breakfast. Simple food, eggs, if the chickens were still laying, oatmeal, toast, nothing like what she was used to, he imagined, but she ate everything he put in front of her. On the second day, she asked if she could help. Help with what? Anything, cooking, cleaning. I can't just sit here. Thomas looked at her splinted leg, her bandaged ribs, her bruised face, and raised an eyebrow. I can peel potatoes sitting down, she insisted. So he gave her potatoes, gave her carrots, small tasks that didn't require standing, but gave her hands something to do. And he watched her work with a focus that seemed disproportionate to the simplicity of the job, like peeling vegetables was somehow important, like it mattered. When's the last time you cooked? He asked. She paused, thinking. I honestly don't know. Years. I have had people for that. People for everything. People for everything, she confirmed. Driver, chef, housekeeper, assistant, lawyer. I had a whole infrastructure designed to make sure I never had to do anything except work. Sounds lonely. It was efficient. That's not what I said. Margaret set down the peeler and looked at him. Really looked at him. Yes, she said quietly. It was very, very lonely. The admission cost her something. He could see it in the way her shoulders tensed, the way she picked up the peeler again too quickly. Like she'd revealed more than she meant to. Like vulnerability was dangerous. Thomas understood that. Understood it better than she probably knew. My wife died 6 years ago, he said. The words came out before he'd decided to say them. Accident at work. Left me with Ben. Left me. He stopped. Started over. I know lonely. She didn't say she was sorry. Didn't offer platitudes. Just nodded once like she understood exactly what he wasn't saying. They worked in silence after that. But it was a different kind of silence. Shared instead of separate. On the third day, Ben called on the satellite phone. Dad, the storm's clearing here. Mr. Patterson says the road should be passable by tomorrow. You okay? Thomas glanced at Margaret, who was pretending not to listen from her spot on the couch. I'm fine, but we've got a guest. Woman from a car accident. She's injured, needs to stay until we can get her to a hospital. Is she nice? Thomas almost laughed. Only Ben would ask if the stranger recuperating in their cabin was nice. She's okay. Can I come home? Give it another day. Roads up here are worse than in town. I'll call when it's safe. When he hung up, Margaret was watching him. You didn't tell him my name, she said. Didn't seem important. It might be when he looks me up, when he sees who I am. And who are you? She smiled sadly. Someone you probably shouldn't be helping. That night after dinner, venison stew that she'd helped make, that she'd eaten like it was a meal in a 5-star restaurant, Margaret asked about Jessica. What was she like? Thomas was washing dishes. He kept his hands moving the familiar rhythm, helping him think. Strong, stubborn. She worked in the mines because the money was good, and she didn't like being told women couldn't do things. She sounds remarkable. She was. He rinsed a plate, set it in the rack. She was also reckless, took chances. I used to tell her she didn't have to prove anything, that the job wasn't worth dying for. But she didn't listen. No. Did she love it, the work? Thomas had to think about that. No, she loved what it gave us, security, a future for Ben. She loved that she could provide. He dried his hands, turned to face Margaret. She would have hated what she was doing if it had just been for herself. But for us, for Ben, she would have done anything. Margaret's eyes were wet. She blinked quickly, looking away. I've never had that, she said softly. Never had anyone I'd do anything for. Never had anyone who'd do anything for me. By choice, by design. She met his eyes again. I learned early that needing people makes you weak, that the only person you can rely on is yourself. So I built a life around that principle. She laughed bitter. And look where it got me. You're alive. Because of you, not because of anything I built. Thomas crossed to the couch, sat in his chair. The fire crackled between them, warm and steady. Everyone needs help sometimes, he said. That's not weakness, that's being human. I don't know how to be that anymore, Margaret whispered. I've been someone else for so long. I don't know if there's anything left of the person I was, the person who might have deserved help. You're here, aren't you, helping with dinner, talking, trying. Thomas leaned forward. That's a start. She looked at him like he'd said something profound. And like maybe possibly he'd given her something she didn't know she needed. Hope. The storm broke on the fourth day. Thomas woke to sunlight, actual real sunlight pouring through the windows like a promise. The snow had stopped. The wind had died. The world outside was buried and pristine and perfectly, dangerously beautiful. He made coffee and stood on the porch breathing cold air that hurt his lungs in the best way. The road would still be impassable, would take days to clear, but the storm was over, which meant decisions had to be made. He went inside. Margaret was awake, staring at the ceiling. Storm's over, he said. I heard. I can call for help, medical helicopter. They'll have you in a hospital by tonight. She didn't answer right away. When she did, her voice was careful. And if I don't want to go yet, Thomas set down his coffee. Why wouldn't you want to go? Because she struggled to sit up, frustrated by her body's limitations, by her dependence. Because out there, I'm Margaret Hale. I'm lawsuits and board meetings and people who tried to kill me. I'm everything I built and everything I lost. And in here, I'm just... She looked around the cabin at the simple furniture, at the life Thomas had made. In here, I'm just someone learning to peel potatoes. Someone trying to remember what it feels like to be human. He understood. God help him, he understood exactly what she meant. You can't hide here forever, he said gently. I know, She looked at him and there were tears on her face now, and she wasn't trying to hide them. I just need a little more time to figure out who I want to be when I go back, if I go back. Thomas should have said no, should have called for the helicopter, sent her back to her life, gotten his cabin back to normal. Should have protected himself and Ben from whatever complicated situation this woman represented. But he looked at her, sitting in his late wife's clothes, crying in his living room, asking for the one thing he actually had to give. Time. Okay, he heard himself say. A few more days, until you're ready. The relief on her face was devastating. Thank you, she whispered. And Thomas wondered what the hell he'd just agreed to. Ben came home on the fifth day. Thomas heard the snowmobile before he saw it, the mechanical whine cutting through the mountain silence. He stepped onto the porch and watched his son navigate the final stretch, Mr. Patterson from town, driving with Ben clinging to the back, both of them bundled against the cold. Behind him inside, he could hear Margaret moving slower than she wanted, faster than she should, trying to get from the couch to the chair, trying to look less like an invalid and more like a guest. Like it mattered. Like making a good impression on a 12-year-old boy was somehow more important than anything she'd done in her corporate life. Dad Ben jumped off before the snowmobile fully stopped running through the snow with the careless energy of youth. He hugged Thomas hard quick, then pulled back. I missed you. 4 days is too long. Missed you too, bud, Mr. Patterson waved from the snowmobile. Roads should be clear by tomorrow. You need anything, Thomas? We're good. Thanks for bringing him up. No trouble. The old man's eyes drifted to the cabin, curious but polite. Small mountain towns learned early not to ask too many questions. You call if you need anything. He left and Thomas was alone with his arm and the weight of explanation. So, Ben said, already heading for the door. Who's the guest? Thomas caught his arm. Ben, she was in a bad accident. She's hurt. Be gentle. Okay. His son looked at him with eyes too old for his age, the eyes of a kid who'd lost his mother and learned that the world could be cruel without warning. I'm always gentle, Dad. And he was. God, he was. They went inside together. Margaret had made it to the chair. She'd even managed to pull a blanket over her lap, hiding the splint. But she looked nervous in a way Thomas hadn't seen before. Uncertain, like she didn't know how to talk to a child. Maybe she didn't. "Hi," Ben said, direct as always. "I'm Ben. Are you okay?" Margaret blinked. Yes, better than I was. Your father saved my life." "He does that." Ben shrugged out of his coat, tossed it toward the hook, and missed. "He's good at fixing things. Are you staying long?" "I don't know yet." "Do you like grilled cheese? Dad makes really good grilled cheese. And we have tomato soup." Ben was already moving toward the kitchen, talking over his shoulder. "I'm starving. Mister, Patterson's wife tried to feed me something called quinoa. It was gross." Thomas caught Margaret's eye. She looked shell-shocked. But underneath that, there was something else. Amusement. And maybe, just maybe, something soft. Over lunch, grilled cheese and soup, exactly as advertised. Ben peppered Margaret with questions. What kind of car had she been driving? Had the accident been scary? Did she live in the city? Had she ever seen the ocean? Margaret answered each one carefully, honestly, editing out only the darkest parts. Yes, the accident was terrifying. Yes, she lived in the city. Yes, she'd seen the ocean. No, she didn't have any children. Why not? Ben asked, too young to know. That was a complicated question. Margaret's hands tightened on her mug. I wasn't. She paused, regrouped. "I chose my work over family. I thought that was the right choice." "Was it? I don't know anymore." Ben accepted this with the easy flexibility of childhood. "Mom always said, you can't know if something's right until after. That's why you have to just pick and see what happens." Margaret's eyes went to Thomas, questioning. "Jessica," he said quietly. "She had a lot of opinions about life. She sounds wise." She was. They finished lunch. Ben cleared the table without being asked, one of the habits Jessica had instilled, one Thomas had maintained through sheer force of will in those first terrible months. Then his son disappeared into his room, ostensibly to do homework, actually to play video games. 12 years old, still mostly innocent, still mostly whole. Thomas wanted to keep him that way. "He's wonderful," Margaret said when they were alone. "He is. You've done well with him. Alone. I've done what I had to do." Thomas started washing dishes. "He makes it easy. He's a good kid." "Because you're a good father." Thomas didn't know how to respond to that. Didn't know if it was true. He just knew he was trying. Every day, in every way, he knew how he was trying not to fail the one person who still needed him. Margaret stood carefully, using the crutches Thomas had fashioned from old ski poles and foam padding. She hobbled to the sink. "Let me dry," she said. "You should rest." "I've been resting for 5 days. Let me help." So he let her. They worked in silence, passing plates and glasses back and forth, falling into an easy rhythm that felt like something practiced, like something they'd done before in another life. "Can I ask you something?" Margaret said after a while. "Sure." "Why do you live up here so isolated?" Thomas rinsed a bowl, taking his time answering. "After Jessica died, the city felt wrong. Too many people, too much noise, too many reminders." He set the bowl in the rack. "Up here it's quiet, simple. Ben and I, we can breathe. Don't you get lonely?" "Sometimes." He looked at her. "But lonely's better than broken." She nodded slowly. "I understand that more than you know." That night, Ben asked if Margaret could stay for dinner. "She is staying for dinner," Thomas said, confused. "No, I mean, can she stay, like, at the table with us?" Ben looked almost shy. "We could play cards after, if she wants." Thomas glanced at Margaret, who was trying very hard not to show how much the invitation meant. "If Margaret wants to," he said. "I'd like that," she said softly. "Very much." So they played cards, gin rummy. Ben won 3 games out of 5, crowing with delight each time. Margaret laughed, actually laughed at open and genuine when he beat her with a particularly clever play. Thomas watched them and felt something dangerous unfold in his chest. This was nice. This felt like family. And that was a problem. Later, after Ben went to bed, Thomas and Margaret sat by the fire. The cabin was quiet except for the occasional pop of burning wood, the whisper of wind outside. "Thank you," Margaret said, "for today. For letting me be part of," she gestured vaguely. "This. He likes you." "I like him. She smiled. He reminds me that there are still good things in the world, pure things. He's the best thing I ever did. You should be proud. I am. Thomas poked at the fire, sending up sparks. But I'm also terrified, every day, that I'm not enough, that I'm failing him, that he needs more than I can give. He needs you, Margaret said firmly. That's obvious. The way he looks at you talks about you. You're his whole world, Thomas. For now, but someday he'll grow up, he'll leave, he'll build his own life. She leaned forward, and he'll do it knowing he was loved completely. That's more than most people get. The way she said it with such certainty, such grief, made Thomas ask the question he'd been avoiding. Did you ever have that being loved completely? Margaret was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. My mother tried, before I pushed her away, before I decided love was weakness and weakness would destroy me. She looked at the fire, not at him. I was 17 when I left home. Never really went back. Sent money, fulfilled my obligations. But I never let her in again. Why, Ma? Because she was poor, because she was tired, because looking at her meant looking at everything I was running from. Margaret's hands twisted in the blanket. She died 12 years ago. Left me a letter I've never opened. Never had the courage to read what she might have wanted to tell me. Thomas felt the weight of that, the terrible finality of it. It's not too late, he said. She laughed bitterly. She's dead, Thomas. It's the definition of too late. Not to read it, not to understand, not to forgive yourself. Margaret turned to look at him then, and her eyes were devastating. Lost. What if I can't? What if I read it and it confirms everything I already know, that I'm exactly as selfish and broken as I think I am? Thomas said quietly. What if it tells you something else? What if she understood? What if she forgave you? Then I'd have to forgive myself, and I do not know if I can do that. The fire crackled. Outside, an owl called, lonely and persistent. Why are you really here, Margaret? Thomas asked. Not in my cabin. In this moment. In this life where someone tried to kill you, and you're hiding in the mountains instead of fighting back. She took a shaky breath. Because I'm tired, Thomas. Tired of fighting. Tired of winning. Tired of being strong. She met his eyes. Because for the first time in 40 years, I don't know what I want. And that's terrifying. What did you want before? To never be powerless again. To never need anyone. To be untouchable. She smiled sadly. I achieved all of that. And it made me miserable. So what do you want now? I don't know, but being here with you and Ben, it's the first time in decades I've felt like maybe there's another way. Maybe I don't have to be that person anymore. Thomas understood the hope in her voice, understood the fear underneath it. You can't stay here forever, he said as gently as he could. I know. Eventually you'll have to go back, face whatever's waiting. I know that too. But Margaret looked around the cabin at the simple furniture, the warm fire, the life Thomas had built in the aftermath of loss. But maybe I don't have to go back to the same life. Maybe I can choose differently. Choose what? I don't know yet, but for the first time I want to find out. The next morning, Margaret asked to see the town. It's a 30-minute drive, Thomas warned. Roads are rough. You'll be in pain. I need to see where you live, where Ben goes to school, what normal looks like. She met his eyes. Please. So he loaded her into the truck carefully, slowly, with a pillow for her leg and blankets for warmth, and drove down the mountain. The town was small, one main street, a grocery store, a diner, a post office. The kind of place where everyone knew everyone, where newcomers were noticed and discussed. Thomas drove slowly, pointing out landmarks. That's Ben's school. That's the diner, best coffee in 50 miles. That's the church where, he stopped. Where what? Where we had Jessica's memorial. Margaret reached over and touched his hand. Just briefly, just enough to say she understood. They parked outside the diner. Thomas helped Margaret out, helped her navigate the steps with her crutches. Inside, every head turned. Thomas, Mary, who'd been running the place for 30 years, came over immediately. Haven't seen you in weeks. And who's? She stopped taking in Margaret's injuries. Oh, honey, what happened? Car accident, Thomas said. She's staying with us until she heals enough to travel. Mary's eyes were sharp, assessing, but her voice stayed warm. Well, any friend of Thomas's is welcome here. You sit down, both of you. Coffee, please, Margaret said. They sat in a corner booth. Thomas ordered for both of them eggs, toast, bacon. Simple food that tasted like home. Margaret ate slowly, watching the diner's other customers. Watching the way people greeted each other, the way conversations flowed, the way community worked. This is what you meant, she said quietly. About breathing. Yeah, it's beautiful. It's not much. It's everything I don't have. Mary came back with more coffee, her eyes curious. So where are you from, hon? Chicago, Margaret said. First lie Thomas had heard from her. Her headquarters were in New York, she'd mentioned once. But Chicago was easier, more anonymous. Long way from home. Yes, it is. When they left, Margaret was quiet. Thomas drove back up the mountain, giving her space to think. I have to tell you something, she said as they pulled up to the cabin. Thomas killed the engine. Waited. I need to make some calls. To my office. To my lawyer. She looked at him. I'm not going back to my old life, but I need to handle things properly. Do you understand, Cho, what kind of things, legal things, financial things, things that will take time but that need to start now? She took a breath. I'm going to step down from my company, from everything. Thomas stared at her. That's Margaret, that's huge. You can't make that decision just because I'm not making it because of the accident or because of you. She smiled. I'm making it because it's right. Because I've been heading toward this moment for years, I just didn't notice it. This, she gestured at the cabin, the mountains, the life around them. This just made it clear. What will you do? I don't know, but I have resources, money, influence. Maybe I can use those things differently. Better. She looked at him. Maybe I can try to fix some of what I broke. Thomas wanted to warn her, wanted to tell her that fixing the past was impossible, that some things stayed broken no matter how hard you tried. But looking at her face, at the hope and determination there, he couldn't do it. Okay, he said, make your calls. Do what you need to do. That night, using Thomas's satellite phone, Margaret started the process of dismantling her empire. She called her lawyer first, then her assistant, then in a conference call that lasted 2 hours, her board of directors. Thomas couldn't hear what was said, but he could see her through the window, pacing as much as her leg would allow, gesturing, occasionally raising her voice, fighting one last battle. When she came back inside, she looked exhausted, drained, but also lighter somehow, like she'd put down a weight she'd been carrying for decades. It's done, she said. Or started anyway. They'll fight me. Try to block it. But my lawyer's good. We'll win. How do you feel? She considered the question seriously. Terrified, relieved, free. She smiled. All of it at once. Ben looked up from his homework. Are you staying then? The question hung in the air. Margaret looked at Thomas, uncertain. For a while, Thomas said carefully, until she figures things out. Ben grinned. Good, you make Dad smile more. After Ben went to bed, Thomas confronted what he'd been avoiding. You can't stay permanently, he said. You know that, right? I know. This isn't, we're not, he struggled for words. This isn't a new life. It's a pause, a break. But eventually you'll need to go back to the world. What if I don't want to and can are different things? Margaret moved closer, standing at the edge of the firelight. What if I told you I'm falling in love with this, with quiet mornings and grilled cheese sandwiches and card games, with feeling human again? Thomas's chest tightened. I'd say that's the rescue talking. That's gratitude and trauma and isolation. It's not real. How do you know? Because I've been there. After Jessica died, I wanted to disappear, wanted to hide up here forever. Took me 2 years to realize I wasn't healing, I was just frozen. He stood, faced her. You're doing the same thing, using this as an escape. Maybe, or maybe I'm finally waking up. They stood there in the dim light, close enough to touch, but not touching. The air between them felt charged, dangerous. I can't be your redemption, Thomas said quietly. Can't be the reason you change. That has to come from you. I know that. Do you, Margaret's eyes glistened. You think I'm using you, using this. I think you're hurting. I think you're lost. And I think, He paused, then said it. I think you scare me. Why me? Because I like you, because Ben likes you, because it would be easy to let you stay to pretend this could work to build something on a foundation of crisis and escape. He stepped back, putting necessary distance between them. But that's not fair to any of us. She nodded slowly. You're right. Of course you're right. I'm sorry. Don't be. You're the first person in years to be honest with me. The first person to see me as something other than useful or dangerous. She smiled sadly. That's worth more than you know. They said goodnight, went to their separate spaces, Thomas to his room, Margaret to the couch that had become her bed. But Thomas lay awake for hours listening to the cabin settle, wondering if he just made the right choice or the worst mistake of his life. And in the living room, Margaret stared at the dying fire and tried to remember who she'd been before she'd learned to be alone. Tried to imagine who she might become if she learned something different. The research took Margaret 3 days. 3 days of satellite phone calls to her lawyer and to archived news databases to people she'd paid over the years to make problems disappear. 3 days of piecing together timelines, cross-referencing acquisitions, finding the connections she'd been too busy, too willfully blind to notice before. And on the third day she found it. Reed Mining Company, acquired by Hale Industries in a hostile takeover. March 2019, restructured, safety budget cut by 40%, new management installed, new quotas implemented, and 7 months later the collapse. 5 dead, 12 injured, families destroyed. Jessica Reed, age 34. Survived the initial collapse, died 3 hours later from internal bleeding because the company's cuts had eliminated the on-site medical team. Margaret sat in Thomas's truck. She'd asked to borrow it to drive down the mountain alone, to do this research where he couldn't see her face and stared at the screen of her laptop until the words blurred. She'd killed his wife. Not directly, not with her own hands, but the orders had come from her office, her directives, her relentless push for efficiency and profit. She'd signed off on the restructuring. She'd approved the budget cuts. She'd probably never even read the safety assessment, had just trusted her team to handle the details while she moved on to the next acquisition, the next victory. Margaret's hands were shaking so badly she had to close the laptop, had to sit there in the cab of the truck in the parking lot of the small library where she'd accessed the internet and try to breathe through the understanding that she'd been living with the man whose life she'd destroyed, that he'd saved her, that she'd been falling. So, stop that thought. Stop it before it becomes real. She drove back up the mountain on autopilot, her mind spinning, trying to find a version of this that wasn't exactly as terrible as it seemed. But there wasn't one. This was clear, simple, devastating. She'd taken everything from him, and he'd given her everything back. Thomas was chopping wood when she pulled up, Ben stacking the split logs with the practiced efficiency of a kid who'd grown up with chores. They both looked up when they heard the truck, both smiled, Ben with easy warmth, Thomas more carefully, but still genuine. She was going to destroy that smile. How'd it go? Thomas called, setting down the axe. Margaret forced herself out of the truck, forced herself to walk towards him on a crutches that suddenly felt like weapons, like evidence. Can we talk? Her voice came out steady. That was good. She could hold it together long enough to confess. Inside, alone. Thomas's expression shifted. He'd heard that tone before, probably. The tone that meant bad news. The tone that meant everything was about to change. Ben finished stacking, he said. I'll be inside. They went in together. Margaret waited until the door closed, until Ben was out of earshot, until there was no escape. Then she told him. I know why Jessica died, she said. I know which company acquired the mine. I know who cut the safety budget. She met his eyes. It was me, Thomas. My company. My orders. I killed your wife. The silence that followed was devastating. Thomas stood there perfectly still, his face draining of color. She watched him process it, watched the information land, watched understanding spread like poison through his system. What? The word came out hoarse, disbelieving. March 2019, Hale Industries acquired Reed Mining. I restructured it, cut costs, eliminated the medical team, increased quotas. Her voice was clinical, factual, because if she let emotion in, she would break. 7 months later, the mine collapsed. Jessica was one of 5 fatalities. I'm so sorry, Thomas. Stop. He held up a hand, backing away from her. Just stop talking. She stopped. Thomas crossed to the window, his back to her, hands gripping the sill like it was the only thing holding him upright. She could see his shoulders shaking, could see him trying to breathe through whatever he was feeling. You knew, he said finally. When did you know? 3 days ago, when I started researching my acquisitions, when I was trying to figure out how to make things right. The words felt pathetic and inadequate. I didn't know before. I swear I didn't know before. But you knew for 3 days. He turned and his face was terrible. You knew for 3 days and you didn't tell me. I was trying to figure out how to what? How to spin it. How to make it hurt less. His voice was rising. There's no version of this that doesn't hurt, Margaret. You killed my wife. You destroyed my family. You're the reason Ben grew up without a mother. I know. Do you? He laughed, sharp and bitter. Do you really know what you did? Because I don't think you can. I don't think you can understand what it's like to get that call, to drive to the hospital knowing she's already dead, to tell your 6-year-old son that mommy isn't coming home. Margaret's eyes were streaming now, but she didn't look away, didn't deserve to look away. You're right, she said. I can't understand, but I don't care what you want. Thomas was shaking with rage now, with grief, with everything he had been holding back. I saved you. I brought you into my home. I let you meet my son. I let you... He stopped, his voice breaking. God, I was starting to care about you. The past tense cut deeper than anything else. Thomas, get out. The words were quiet, final. Please let me get out. He looked at her with eyes that had gone cold, that had shut down completely. I'll drive you to town, to the hospital, anywhere you want. But you can't stay here. Not another night, not another hour. She wanted to argue, wanted to explain that she was different now, that she'd changed, that she wanted to make this right. But looking at his face, she knew none of that mattered. Nothing she could say would change what she'd done. So she nodded. Okay. She gathered her things, painfully few borrowed clothes and basic necessities. Thomas helped her to the truck without speaking, mechanical and distant, like she was a stranger, like she'd never been anything else. Ben came running over. Where are you going? I have to leave, Margaret said, and her voice finally cracked. I'm sorry, Ben. I'm so sorry. But why did something happen? Yes, Thomas said before Margaret could answer. Something happened. Say goodbye. Ben looked between them, confusion and hurt on his young face. But he was his father's son. He knew when to push and when to accept. Bye, Margaret, he said quietly. I hope your leg gets better. She wanted to hug him, wanted to tell him he was wonderful, that knowing him had been a gift, that she'd never forget his kindness. But she'd lost that right. Thank you, Ben, for everything. The drive down the mountain was silent. Thomas drove fast, reckless, like he couldn't wait to be rid of her. Margaret didn't blame him, didn't ask him to slow down, just held on and watched the life she had almost had disappear behind them. At the hospital, he helped her inside, spoke to the admissions desk, made sure she was checked in properly. Even angry, even destroyed, he was kind. It made everything worse. Thomas, she said as he turned to leave, I know this doesn't matter. I know nothing I say will change what I did. But I need you to know I'm going to make this right, however I can. He looked at her for a long moment. You can't make this right, Margaret. Jessica's gone. No amount of money or guilt or changed behavior will bring her back. I know. Then why say it? Because, she took a shaky breath, because I need you to know that knowing you, knowing Ben, it changed me. It mattered. It shouldn't have. His voice was flat, exhausted. You should have stayed a stranger. We both would have been better off. He left. Margaret stood there in the hospital lobby, leaning on her crutches, watching through the windows as his truck pulled away. As the best thing that had happened to her in 40 years drove out of her life. And she understood finally what she'd been running from all these years. Not poverty, not powerlessness. This exact moment, this exact pain, the pain of caring about someone enough that losing them destroyed you. The pain of being human. The doctors admitted her, Said her leg properly scanned for internal injuries, prescribed pain medication, and physical therapy. A social worker came by to ask questions. Where was she staying? Did she have family? Did she feel safe? Margaret answered mechanically, gave them her lawyer's number, arranged for a hotel room, made calls to set up the logistics of a life she no longer wanted. Her assistant Sandra arrived the next morning, face carefully neutral, but eyes full of questions. The board's going crazy, Sandra said. Your resignation, the restructuring, the foundation you're setting up, they're threatening legal action. Let them threaten. Margaret, you need to think about this. You built this company. You can't just walk away. Watch me. Vandra sat down looking at her boss, former boss, with something like concern. What happened to you up on that mountain? Because I'm not what yourself, the Margaret Hale I know doesn't quit, doesn't run, doesn't make emotional decisions about legacy and reparations. And Sandra gestured at the hospital room. Whatever this is, Margaret smiled sadly. Maybe that's the problem. Maybe the Margaret Hale you knew needed to die. And who are you now? I don't know yet, but I'm going to find out. Over the next week, Margaret worked from her hospital bed from the hotel room after she was discharged, rebuilding her life from the ground up. She established a foundation fully funded, independently operated, dedicated to supporting families affected by mining accidents. She hired investigators to review every safety incident at every property she'd ever owned. She set up compensation funds, college scholarships, medical coverage for anyone who'd been harmed by her company's negligence. It would cost hundreds of millions. She didn't care. Her lawyer tried to talk her out of it. Margaret, this sets a precedent, opens you up to lawsuits, admits liability. Good, I am liable. Let them sue. This could destroy you financially. I'll still be richer than 99% of the planet. I'll survive. And what she didn't tell him was that she was hoping it would destroy her, hoping the weight of making amends would be heavy enough to equal the weight of what she'd done, hoping it would be enough. It wasn't. At night alone in her hotel room, Margaret dreamed of the cabin, of quiet mornings and card games, of Ben's laughter and Thomas's careful smile, of feeling for just a moment like she belonged somewhere, like she was home. She wanted to call, wanted to check on them to see if Thomas had softened at all, if there was any path back to what? To friendship, to forgiveness. There wasn't. She knew that, had to accept that. But God, it hurt. 2 weeks after leaving the cabin, Margaret's lawyer called with news. The foundation is operational. First disbursements are going out, and he paused. There's a request from a Thomas Reed for compensation under the Mining Victim Fund. Margaret's heart stopped. What does he want? College fund for his son. Medical coverage for himself. He's got some old injuries that need attention. And another pause. He wants to talk to you. He said that his exact words were, tell her I need to understand, tell her I'll meet her halfway. Halfway, not all the way, not forgiveness, but something, a chance, a conversation. Set it up, Margaret said. Wherever he wants, whenever he wants, I'll be there. She had no idea what Thomas wanted to say, no idea if this was closure or cruelty or something in between. But she'd spent 40 years running from hard conversations. Not this time. This time she'd show up. They met at the diner. Margaret arrived early, driving herself for the first time since the accident. Her leg was healing, still in a brace, still tender, but functional. She walked with a cane now instead of crutches. Progress, her physical therapist called it. It felt like penance. The diner was quiet at 2 in the afternoon, the lunch rush over the dinner crowd hours away. Mary looked up when Margaret entered, recognition and something like sympathy crossing her face. He's in the back booth, Mary said quietly. Coffee, please. Margaret made her way to where Thomas sat, staring out the window at the snow-dusted street. He looked thinner than she remembered. More tired, like the last 2 weeks had aged him, like she'd aged him. Hi, she said, sliding into the booth across from him. Hi. They sat in silence while Mary brought coffee, while she topped off Thomas's cup, while she disappeared back to the kitchen with tactful efficiency. Finally, Thomas spoke. I've been trying to figure out what to say to you, he admitted. Practiced it in my head about 100 times. And now that you're here, I still don't know. You don't have to say anything. No, I do, because he looked at her directly for the first time. I treated you like a villain, like you deliberately consciously set out to hurt people. And that's not fair. Margaret blinked surprise. Thomas, I killed your wife. You made business decisions that indirectly led to her death. Those aren't the same thing. Aren't they? I don't know. He wrapped his hands around his mug. That's what I've been trying to figure out. Where the line is between negligence and malice, between making hard choices and making cruel ones. And I still don't have an answer. But I know this, you didn't know who I was when you stayed at the cabin. You didn't know what your company had done to my family, which means everything that happened between us, the conversations, the card games, the way Ben looked at you, that was real. Margaret felt tears building. It was the most real thing in my life. Mine too, and that's, Thomas's voice caught. That's what I can't reconcile. How do I hold both truths that you're responsible for the worst thing that ever happened to me and that knowing you was important? Good. You don't have to reconcile them. You can just hate me. You're allowed to hate me. I know, I have been hating you. For 2 weeks I've been so angry I couldn't see straight. He met her eyes. But I've also been missing you. Missing the version of you that sat at my table and peeled potatoes and laughed at my son's terrible jokes. And I don't know what to do with that. Mary refilled their coffee. Neither of them touched it. I'm not asking for forgiveness, Margaret said carefully. I don't deserve that. But I need you to know I'm trying to fix what I can. The foundation, the compensation, the safety reviews. It won't bring Jessica back. Won't undo the damage. But it's something. I know, my lawyer sent me the details. Thomas paused. It's more than something, Margaret. It's more than I ever expected. More than most people would do. It's not enough. No, but it's a start. He took a breath. I want Ben to go to college. I want him to have opportunities I couldn't give him. The fund you set up, it makes that possible. So thank you. The gratitude in his voice almost broke her. I don't want your thanks, Thomas. I want... She stopped, knowing she had no right to finish that sentence. No right to want anything from him. But he finished it anyway. You want to go back to before you knew, when things were... He searched for the word, possible. Yes, so do I, he smiled sadly. But we can't. I know. They sat with me that truth. Let it settle between them, heavy and final. Ben asks about you, Thomas said after a while. Wants to know if you're okay, if you're coming back. What do you tell him? That you're healing, that you needed to go back to your life. He paused. He doesn't know about Jessica, about the connection. I can't. Don't, Margaret said quickly. Please don't tell him. Let him think whatever he thinks. Let him remember me as someone who was kind to him, not as the person who killed his mother. The words hit like a physical blow. Yes, she whispered. Thomas nodded slowly. Okay, for now. But someday when he's older, he'll have to know. He'll have questions about the foundation, about why I accepted money from a woman he barely knew. And I'll have to tell him the truth. I understand. Do you? Because once he knows that's it, whatever good memories he has of you, they'll be tainted, complicated. He might hate you, probably will hate you. He should. He has every right. Thomas studied her face. You really believe that, don't you, that you deserve to be hated? Don't I? I think he hesitated. I think you made terrible choices. I think you prioritized profit over people and it cost lives. But I also think you didn't understand the human cost. Didn't see the faces behind the numbers. That's not an excuse. No, it's not. But it's context. And context matters. He leaned forward. You can't undo what you did, Margaret. Can't bring Jessica back or give Ben his childhood with his mother. But you can choose to be different going forward. And from what I've seen, you're trying. Trying isn't enough. It's all any of us can do. They drank their coffee. Outside, snow began to fall again, light and persistent. I'm selling my apartment, Margaret said, the penthouse in New York, donating most of what's in it. I'm trying to figure out who I am without all the trappings. And who are you finding? Someone smaller, quieter, someone who might actually be able to sleep at night. She smiled without humor. Someone who's terrified she waited too long to change. You're 52, right? 53 in April. My dad lived to 91, spent the last 30 years of his life trying to make up for the first 60. Thomas paused. He wasn't a good man for a long time. Drank, got angry, made my mother's life hell. But then she died and something in him broke open. He got sober, started volunteering at the shelter, became the kind of grandfather to Ben he never was as a father to me. Did you forgive him? Eventually, not all at once, not easily, but yeah, I forgave him. Thomas met her eyes. Because he did the work, he showed up. Every single day for 30 years he showed up and tried to be better. And that mattered. Margaret felt something crack open in her chest, something that might have been hope. Can I ask you something? She said. Sure. If I do the work, if I show up every day and try to be better, is there any world where we could? She couldn't finish, couldn't name what she wanted because it felt too big, too impossible. But Thomas understood. I don't know, he said honestly. Right now, looking at you hurts. Being in the same room with you hurts. I can't. I'm not ready to be your friend, Margaret. Maybe I never will be. I understand. But, he took a breath. But if you're serious about changing, about doing the work, then maybe someday that changes. Maybe someday I can look at you and see the person who peeled potatoes and played cards with my son instead of the person who signed the orders that killed my wife. That's more than I deserve. Probably, but it's what I've got. He stood, pulled on his coat. I should go. Ben's waiting. Margaret stood too. Thomas, thank you for meeting me, for listening, for everything. He nodded, turned to leave, then stopped. The foundation is doing good work, he said without turning around. Real good. People are getting help they desperately needed. So keep doing that. Keep showing up. Keep trying. I will. And Margaret, next time we do this, if there is a next time, maybe it won't hurt quite so much. He left. Margaret sat back down, finished her cold coffee, and cried quietly into her hands. Mary came over after a while, refilled her cup with fresh coffee, and squeezed her shoulder. You're doing okay, hon, she said. I don't know what happened between you two, but I know Thomas. He doesn't talk to people he's written off. If he's talking to you, there's hope. You think so? I know so. Mary smiled. Mountain people, we believe in second chances. Have to in a place this harsh. We've all made mistakes. All got things we're trying to live down. The question isn't whether you messed up, it's what you do after. Margaret thought about that, about showing up, about doing the work, about trying. 3 months later, Margaret moved to the town, not to the mountain she understood that would be too close, too presumptuous, but to the small apartment above the general store, the one that had been vacant for years. She paid a year's rent up front, furnished it simply, and settled in like she was planning to stay. People were suspicious at first. This was a small town and strangers were noteworthy. But Mary vouched for her. She's good people just going through something. And gradually, slowly, Margaret became part of the landscape. She volunteered at the library, helped with the food bank, attended town hall meetings and listened more than she spoke. She learned names, histories, the invisible networks that made small communities function. She saw Thomas sometimes at the grocery store, at the diner, once at a school event where Ben was performing in the band. They'd nod, exchange pleasantries, keep their distance. It hurt less each time. Or maybe she was just getting better at bearing it. The foundation grew. By the end of the year, they had helped 43 families, funded 8 safety overhauls, established 3 scholarship programs. Margaret worked remotely, managing grants, reviewing applications, saying yes to every legitimate request that came through. Her old board tried to sue her. She settled quickly, generously, with the stipulation that all proceeds went to the foundation. They accepted. She was no longer the richest woman in her industry, wasn't even close, but she slept at night mostly, and that was worth more than she'd ever imagined. On a Tuesday in late spring, Margaret was restocking shelves at the food bank when Ben walked in. He stopped when he saw her, surprise clear on his face, then a smile. Margaret, you're here. Hi, Ben. Her heart was racing. She hadn't spoken to him since leaving the cabin. How are you? Good, school's almost out. I'm going to camp this summer, a coding camp with the scholarship from... He stopped, something shifting in his expression. From your foundation. So he knew, at least part of it. I'm glad, she said carefully. You'll do great. Dad told me about your company, about what happened. Ben's voice was quiet, serious. About Mom. Margaret's hands stilled on the cans she'd been organizing. I'm so sorry, Ben. Sorrier than I can ever express. Dad says you didn't know when you stayed with us. I didn't, but that doesn't make it better. Doesn't change what my company did. Ben was quiet for a moment. I was really mad when he told me. Wanted to hate you. You're allowed to hate me. I know, but he looked at her directly, and his eyes were Jessica's eyes and Thomas's eyes and entirely his own. But I remember you. Remember you helping with dinner and playing cards and making Dad laugh. And I don't think people who are all bad can do those things. Margaret's eyes burned. Thank you, Ben. That means everything. Are you staying in town? For a while, if that's okay. It's okay, he smiled. Maybe we could, I don't know, get ice cream sometime if Dad says it's okay. I'd like that. Very much. Ben left a few minutes later, and Margaret stood there among the shelves of canned goods and pasta, shaking with something that felt almost like joy. That night, Thomas called. Ben said he ran into you. He did. We talked. Just briefly. He wants to see you again. He mentioned that. I told him only if you were comfortable with it. Thomas was silent for a long moment. I've been watching you, this whole time you've been in town, watching you volunteers show up, do the work. And I've been waiting for the catch, for the moment you'd get bored or frustrated or decide this was too hard. And you haven't, you've just kept going, kept showing up. That's all I know how to do. It's enough. Another pause. Ice cream is fine. I'll probably come too, if that's okay. Not ready to leave you alone with him, but okay with you being around. Margaret felt tears sliding down her face. Thank you, Thomas. Thank you for giving me a chance. Don't thank me yet. We're nowhere near fixed. Might never be fixed. I know. But maybe we're starting to heal. Both of us. They had ice cream the following Saturday. The three of them sitting at a picnic table outside the town's single ice cream shop, talking about school and summer plans, and nothing consequential. It was awkward. It was careful. It was fragile. It was beautiful. Thomas smiled at something Ben said, and for just a moment his eyes met Margaret's. And there was something there that wasn't anger or pain, something that might eventually become forgiveness. The summer passed. Fall came. Margaret continued her quiet work foundation management community service, showing up. Thomas continued his careful distance, his measured acceptance, his slow thawing. They had dinner together once a month, nothing formal, just three people sharing a meal, building something that might eventually resemble trust. On a cold November evening, a year after the accident, Margaret stood on her small balcony watching snowfall. The mountains were white-capped and beautiful, the town below quiet and peaceful. Her phone rang. Thomas. Hey, she answered. Hey, you busy? Just watching the snow. We're about to have dinner. Ben made spaghetti, probably not very good spaghetti, but he's proud of it. You want to come over? Margaret's breath caught. Over. To the cabin, to the place where everything had started and ended and might possibly be beginning again. Are you sure? No, Thomas said honestly. But I'm trying. We're trying. So you want to come or not? I do, yes, I'll be there in 30 minutes. She drove up the mountain carefully, her headlights cutting through falling snow. The road was familiar now. She'd driven it a dozen times, dropping off supplies, delivering books Ben had requested, finding excuses to be helpful without being intrusive. But she'd never been invited inside. Thomas met her at the door. Come in, it's freezing. The cabin looked the same, felt the same, warm and simple and safe. Ben grinned from the kitchen. Margaret, I made dinner. It's probably terrible. I'm sure it's wonderful, she said and meant it. They ate Ben's somewhat overcooked spaghetti and laughed at his commentary on his cooking skills. They played cards after gin rummy, same as before, and Ben won 2 out of 3 games. And when it was time for Margaret to leave, Thomas walked her to her car. Thank you, she said, for tonight, for letting me in. It's not, he paused, it's not forgiveness, not yet, maybe not ever, but it's a start. Yeah, a start. They stood there in the snow, this man who'd saved her life, and this woman who'd destroyed his, and something passed between them, that was complex and painful and real. Not love, not yet, maybe never. But not hate either, something softer, something earned through showing up, through doing the work, through choosing every single day to try to be better than who they'd been. Good night, Thomas. Good night, Margaret. She drove down the mountain with tears on her face and hope in her chest. Between the crash in the cabin, between death and wealth, between who she'd been and who she was becoming, Margaret Hale had finally learned the most important lesson of her life. That being human meant being broken. That being broken meant having the chance to heal. And that healing, real, honest, difficult healing, required showing up even when it hurt, especially when it hurt, and trusting that someday, somehow, the pain would transform into something that looked almost like peace. She wasn't there yet, but she was trying, and for the first time in 40 years, that felt like enough.